Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's afternoon now, which means it's time for the presentation. My name is Josh Kaplan. I am going to be talking today about continuous integration and continuous delivery with Salesforce DX. So I'm sure you guys have heard something about this Salesforce DX thing. We've been working on it for quite a while. Very excited to bring it to you here at the conference. And I'm going to talk about very specifically how you can do continuous integration and continuous delivery using the tools provided by Salesforce DX. I already told you who I am. Here I am again. It's my Twitter information. Forward-looking statements. As you know, this means we're all looking forward to getting past this and getting to the presentation. It actually means go look at the website for full details. We're saying things about the future here. Make your decisions based on publicly available information. So what are the questions we're going to try to answer here about continuous integration and continuous delivery? What is CI? What's our definition of it? How can I do CI? What about this continuous delivery thing? Where have I heard all this before, and what's it all going to look like in the Salesforce DX world? With respect to the first question, I'll answer that now. It's kind of a critical thing as we get the same definition. Continuous integration is the idea that you are going to continuously check your changes into a common shared repository and continuously run tests against those changes so that you can be informed as quickly as possible if something you're doing is not going to integrate with the changes made by everybody else. It's a critical thing for team development. Lots of people making changes at different times. Sometimes they're going to be compatible and totally unrelated to one another, but there are going to be times where they're going to be overlapping and there's going to be conflict. And you want to know about that conflict as soon as you possibly can. The later you find out, the more work you have to do to get yourself to a happy state. Continuous integration as a process is intended to get you that information as quickly as possible so you can resolve the changes and work together as a largely disconnected team on the same application in the same repository. So let's go into a little more detail. What are the things you need to be successful at this CI and CD? You need an environment strategy, making sure you align your environments to what the task you're doing is. You need a version control strategy. You need to automate your test execution because developers cannot be trusted to run tests. This is true. I know you all know that. You're all looking inside yourself saying, yes, he is correct. We're going to create a test pipeline so you do different tests at different points during the delivery process. And I'll go through some branching strategies that might help make some sense of this. This sometimes can be a little complicated when you're dealing with how do I set my team up with the work they're doing aligned with the tests that they're going to run. With an environment strategy, the critical bit is that you end up with the right environment for the right task. This will get you good, consistent test results if you're always using the same environment, and you'll know that the delivery when you're deploying to your customers is going to be consistent, and you can be certain you did a good job. So I got three basic use cases here. You've got your developer environment, your test environment, and your production environment. There's going to be more. We'll get to them, but let's talk about what you could do. Today, in the world before yesterday, before you had access to Salesforce DX, typically you'd be working in a developer sandbox. You'd do your testing in a dev sandbox or a full sandbox, and you would work towards delivering to a production environment. If you're one of our ISV partners, you would do slightly differently. You would use a developer edition org for both your development and your testing, which gets a little confusing, and then you'd be deploying to a packaging org. What we're going to be providing you now is a brand new concept, the Scratch org. Scratch org is going to be useful both as a deployment environment, a developer environment, and a testing environment. And as I'll go through a little bit later, what's great about this is you are now starting with the same environment as a developer as you're going to run your tests in. This means that there's no differences between the sandbox you were in and the sandbox you're deploying to. There's no differences between the template you use to spin up your DE org for development and the template you use to spin up the DE org for testing. Scratch orgs are built from scratch. This is the consistency I'm talking about here and the consistent test results. If you have a very similar starting point and you push your information into the same environment, you're going to end up with similar results. And that is what you need to know that everything you're doing is going to be nice and smooth as you deliver your application. Next up, version control strategy. So there are some people who think that you should go rock climbing with no ropes and no gear. There are some people, like the one on the stage, who think that's crazy. Yes, you can do it. Yes, it's possible. It's more challenging and more dangerous. This is similar with the version control strategy. There are some people who'd like to make applications without version control. I think it's crazy. You certainly can do it. It may be a little quicker, but it's going to be more challenging and it's going to be more dangerous. So I'm just assuming that you're going to have a version control strategy, you're going to use something for version control, and we're going to go move on so nobody hurts themselves. In the world of sandbox, how do we do things? Each developer had their own developer sandbox. They would write code. Since this is how, with continuous integration, I'm going to have a version control system. So I'm running my tests, and then I'm committing to this version control system. Everyone's happy. Then what happens with continuous integration is we have an automation tool that's going to step into place here. I've got Jenkins as a logo, but you could use TeamCity, Circle, Travis. Any automation tool will work. And the next step there is that's going to take a new developer sandbox. This is an idealized world, of course. It's starting from the same point. You deploy those changes, and you run your Apex tests. This is great. This would be fantastic. Everybody's using a developer sandbox. All the tests are being run in developer sandbox. We have that consistency because everything started at the same starting point, and we can be confident in our results, and they promote to production. Now, in the world of not infinite sandboxes, we had problems there. One of the problems was that you would have to reuse your developer sandbox over and over. So your first step was you'd have to clean your org and get all the other changes you'd made out and get it to its base state. And then you'd write your code, and then you'd run your tests and check them in. So probably had it at the right starting point, but you're not sure. What automation system had to try to clean out the developer sandbox because we couldn't just reuse them. We don't have an infinite number of them. And so we do that clean job, and we deploy the changes, and hopefully the test results are consistent. This is what you guys have been doing for a while. If you've got anything automated set up, I commend you. We're going to make something better for you. ISVs had it a little bit easier. Building a managed package, you would spin up a developer edition, write your code there, and check your changes into your version control system. I would then launch a Salesforce org, which probably close to my developer edition org, but maybe not quite the same, but a little bit more consistent because it's always coming from a Salesforce template. Run my tests. So these are some basic ways that people are able to do continuous integration in today's world prior to the advent of Scratch orgs. Salesforce DX is going to make this a lot easier for you, a lot more consistent, a lot more stable, and easier to understand for everyone. Now, funny, the first step here isn't what org I'm in. This is a big change with Salesforce DX. You just start writing your code. You have a local repository. You write your code. You don't need an org until you're done, at which point you spin up a Scratch org. But you build from scratch, and you push your changes from your repository into that Scratch org. At that point, you can run your tests and make sure everything's good to go. Now, in your testing environment, the automation server, Mr. Jenkins here, is going to spin up another Scratch org, which is exactly the same empty Scratch org that you used to run your tests on your local machine. It's going to pull your changes from source control, push them to that Scratch org, and the test should be the same. You should be consistent. Now, naturally, you're going to be running some integration tests with other people's changes, so you'll find out anything that went wrong because you're using a later version or you checked out from an earlier version, other changes happened in the meantime. But you know that everything was starting from the same point. So this Scratch org is going to give you a consistency you didn't have before with sandboxes or with developer edition org. So everyone's going to have a much better time moving forward. Talk a little bit about continuous delivery. I've talked about the first two steps of a testing process, but continuous delivery is wanting to make sure you've got a rigid, established path through which all of your changes go from developer's mind into your user's hands. It's consistent every time so that you know that the quality controls you want to put in place are always enforced. We talked a bit about the automated testing for the developer, the Apex tests you've run, any UI tests, any API tests you've run. Talk about other people we can bring in. We could bring in UAT users for user acceptance testing. We could have a staging environment to do an extra set of tests before we deploy to production to make sure things are good. We could have performance tests. There's lots of different things you might want to have and you want to establish as a pattern that you're always going to go through when you're making version 1.1 and 1.2 of your application. Everything always moves left to right, the developer, up forward towards the user, and it's like chutes and ladders. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the next slide. Sorry. Talked about what we do with the Scratch orgs here. Now, for UAT, I'm going to use a sandbox. I'm going to use a sandbox environment. Sandboxes do have a place in the Salesforce DX world. It's not all Scratch orgs. Scratch orgs are great, but there aren't any users in them. There's just you as a user. You can log in from the command line, or you can open the org from the command line. But if you want to do testing with all of your users, Sandbox is great. They all have IDs. They can log in. They can all collaborate in that place. So we're going to use a sandbox environment for UAT testing. UAT testing is a little redundant. So I'm going to refresh that sandbox, deploy my changes there, and I'll do a user blitz where everyone's going to go through and run through and see if the logic met the requirements that they have put in place when they specified the application. Now, before going to production, I want to put it into staging. So I have a full or a dev sandbox that I want to refresh. and deploy my changes there to make sure that right before I push this into my production environment, I have a chance to do a deployment and rerun my Apex text in that environment. So I do this in staging. It gives me more confident about going forward to production. Got lots of different things. We could have 5 different feature branches. So after feature testing is done, we want to have an integration testing step, or we'll have a place where all these things are tested together. I might want to do performance testing. I might want to do performance testing before user acceptance testing. I might want to do it after. So just some suggestions. I want you guys to find the set of steps that make sense for your application, for your teams, and it's going to be different for every single one of you. The more testing, the better. The more likely you are to deliver good quality applications into your users' hands. Here's my chutes and ladders bit that I was talking about. So everything's going left to right, but if we make a change, we go back. We always go back to the beginning. The developer's going to start over again and push everything through the process from left to right again. So I want to talk now about branches. Again, this is just a suggestion. This is how it works in my mind. I can reason about things if I set it up this way. Everybody, please set it up the way that makes sense for you. No one size fits all. This is just one suggestion to give your mind some ideas of what might work. I like to line up a branch for every environment that is in the process here. So 2 developers on the team, me and you. I got my branch, you've got your branch, and each of those are tied to a Scratch org that we're working on. We've split our own branches. And we split them off a feature branch, which I've called develop here. I don't like that we use the word develop as a branch in Git, but that's what we do. So that's the develop branch. It's my team's feature branch. And then this integrate branch is lined up to what's deployed to my UAT environment. And I've got my master branch, which is what's in staging and production. So the head of each of these branches maps to what's deployed in any one of these orgs at any point in time. So to illustrate how that works, on day 1, I've got version 1.0 of my system running in master. We want to make a new 1.1 release. So we branch from that, we put it in develop, and you as a developer go and start with your branch and make some changes there. And me as a developer, I go on my branch and I make some changes. So our environments are different than production now because we've done things, we've made changes to it. So you're done, you check back in to develop, and now CI takes over, runs a bunch of tests, and you're done with your task. Your branch goes away. Develop now looks different. So that testing environment, that Blitz org or whatever you got there, people can log in and see what the world looked like with your changes added to where it started. Now I'm done. I want to do the same thing. I want to check in, but I can't. I can't because there's been changes that are made, so I'm going to have to pull down, forward integrate changes from that develop branch into my branch, run my tests again before I finally pull it back into develop. Again, now my branch is no longer necessary because my task is done. My Scratch org is no longer necessary because my task is done. And I've now got a new release candidate up here in the develop branch. So I've got one of these branches assigned to each one of these environments. When I'm ready to move it forward to UAT, I pull the changes forward into the integrate branch as I deploy to UAT, so I know what the state of the world looks like in each of those branches based on my repository. This could help. This might make sense. This might not. This makes sense in my mind. Find something that works for you, but I will say that having a branch strategy that aligns to your environment is going to make your life a lot easier, make it easier to onboard people to your team and to keep track of what it is that you're building and what stage you're at for all the things you're doing in your application. All right, so some of you are going to say, wait a minute. Didn't you do pretty much the same presentation last year at Dreamforce in October? Like even the same jokes and some of the same slides? Yes, I did. Guilty. But I will say, that was October. So many things have changed since October. Think about how much different the world is, right? Back then, the Cavaliers had just beat the Warriors to be NBA champions. Not anymore. We've gone from having our first black president to having our first orange president. Very inclusive here. Serena Williams, remarkably, had never won a major tennis tournament while pregnant. In fact, even more remarkably, she actually did that. My kids had never been to Disney World. A lot of things have changed. And Ohio State had won something more recently than the Chicago Cubs. So, go Cubs. The world has changed, and my presentation now has 100% more demo. Yes. And I see you over there saying, wait a minute, if you had 0 demo before, now 100% more. Yeah, I know. But you heard the clapping, so don't mess. 100% more demo. Here we go. Let's go back to the principles of CI just to level set again. What do we want to do? We want to make sure the build is never broken. So we're going to write lots of tests. Eat your vegetables, brush your teeth, put on sunscreen, write lots of tests. You got to do it. Always check in as frequently as you can and run the test as often as you can to make sure that things are never broken. Make sure that bad news travels quickly. The thing we're going to focus now on for the demo is run tests often. We're going to use the power of the CLI from Salesforce DX to automate the tests and integrate with a continuous integration system. So here we go into the demo, no further ado. Now, this is all being done. So I got a repo, I got an IDE, I got a CLI, 3 chords and the truth. I did this using Travis CI. It does not require you have much knowledge on how Travis CI works, which is good, because 3 days ago I'd never used Travis CI before. That's the truth. I use lots of other CI systems. The same principles I'm applying here would work with any CI tool you want to use. It's part of the ethos of Salesforce DX is bring your own. Whatever it is that you've got on site that you're comfortable with, you can use it, but all this will work. The Trailhead trail does work with Travis, which is why I wanted to make sure this was so that you could look back on and say, oh yeah, I remember seeing that in the presentation. So let me do some quick changes here. First, I'm in my IDE, and I hope that's not too much of an eye chart there. I've got my project synced locally. I've got a Git repository. This is my Git repository I was showing you. I've got it cloned locally, and I'm going to do some changes against it. The first step here is not to open up an org. No, the first step is to make sure I've got my own branch. So I'm going to switch to a new branch. What I call it my branch, right? My branch. This is my branch. So now I've switched. You see over here it says I've switched to my branch. And I'm going to create some Apex tests. So let's go in here. Like I said, always write your tests. Here's some class I've got. New Apex. Have you guys seen the IDE 2? Brand new IDE integrated to Salesforce DX. What I want to call this thing, it's called the Who is Ignoring Us test. We'll see who's ignoring us. And as you'll see, I've written a whole bunch of tests over here. Who's actually listening, checking emails that could wait, messing with the Wi-Fi, looking at the next session, looking for a flight delays. All right, we'll come over here. Now I've got myself a brand new test class. So it's living on my machine, it's saved in my hard drive. That's not going to do much good to run an Apex test. So the next step I have to do is I'm going to have to push this to my Scratch org. Right now I would normally create my Scratch org, but I didn't trust the Wi-Fi. So I'm just going to push into one I created before. Normally now I would create. You see down in the bottom corner over here, it's pushing source. You get a little progress bar to let you know. You could do all this from the command line. I've seen so many command line demos. I said, we're going to do an IDE demo today. So all this works in the command line, but if you're an IDE person like me, this works there too. So now I should have pushed this up to the Scratch org. So I can now right-click here, and I could say Run as Apex Test. Or I can even go over here, and I can right-click, and I can say Run as Apex Test. I can right-click. I can see the beach ball. Run as Apex Test. So let's run the test to make sure everything was good. I've got a brand new little window at the bottom here where it should be running stuff. 0 of 7 have run, and green. Everything succeeded, so I've got a nice test console. I'm ready to go. I've got some tests to run, and I want to push them back to my repository. So I'm going to commit. Where'd you go? Team commit. It's going to take my unstaged changes. I'm going to stage them. I'm going to put a message. Demo tests. Who is listening? And we're going to commit and push. So I did my work on the developer side. All this work was done on the local machine, with the exception of using my Scratch org simply as a place to run some tests. I didn't even open the org at all. Never even saw the UI. All I did was use it as a place to be my runtime, to run the tests, and make sure everything was good. I used the Git tools that are integrated to the IDE to commit back to my repository. And if I flip over to my repository, we should see right here that a change is in the repo. I want to pull my branch back into master. And as we just discussed for the last 15 minutes, we don't want to do that unless we've tested everything. So let's let the automation take over. So first I'm going to compare with my master branch, and with my branch it says I'm able to merge. So I'm going to create the pull request, and it should just automatically merge for me, but not right away. As you see right here, some checks haven't completed yet. I've got one pending check, so it's got some checks that are going on. Let's go look at them. I'll come over here to the Travis CI user interface. Here's my morning test, which will soon be replaced. If I click here, it'll probably give me an updated version. There's Mr. Travis, and there we go. So it's booting up some tests, and it's going to run automatically. As soon as I did a pull request over here, Travis took over and started running things. While it's doing that, I'm going to show you how, because it's the most interesting part of all of the demo. If I come back, to my repository, if you do the trail on Trailhead, you will get your very own Travis YML file. I don't know what the Y stands for. I think the ML is markup language, so it's your markup language. We'll go with that. This is a series of commands that launch Travis and do Salesforce DX work. Again, a lot of this came from that trail, and some of it isn't necessarily specific to what we're doing here, but this launches an environment, puts a Chrome browser in place, it gives some authentication through SSL, and then it installs the plugins it needs in order to do the things it does. So here's a Heroku plugin install in the new environment that's spun up. It has some default variables. Install another plugin. Now, these are the commands you're probably more familiar with. Force auth. I'm now using the CLI to authenticate to the hub org that you got with Salesforce DX. The next step, force org create. I'm creating a brand new scratch org, only for the purpose of test. This is different than the tests that I ran before. This is different than the development org I was using. This is one being automatically spun up by that Travis guy that showed up for a second in order to run the integrated tests that are needed to verify that we should merge. Once that's spun up, I do a source push. All the stuff that's in the repository, based on the pull request that kicked this off, is going to be merged into that particular org so the test can be run. And then I got force apex test run. So basically the same steps you saw me do as a developer are being done now in an automated fashion through this markup language file. This is being spun every single time a check-in comes into Travis. It's going to hit this, and it's going to do these steps. It's going to create that, it's authenticate, create the org, push the source, and run some tests. Pretty cool, huh? Another thing I've got in here, which is interesting to point out, is you might see I've got this force lightning lint right here. So we got a couple of lightning test commands. The lightning lint command makes sure that you've all of your Aura files, all of your lightning files meet your specifications. They don't have anything you've set up is wrong. You can't have any, put any passwords in there or whatever it does. It says it checks that first, and then it's running force lightning test run. We have an automated lightning test running tool now. So you'll be reading about this. This lets you run a series of JavaScript tests. That's why I installed the Chrome browser back up here. A series of JavaScript tests that you can author just like your Apex tests. So you have an automated set of tests for your Lightning to make sure your UI is stable. And then when all is done, force org delete. Let's be good citizens and clean up the world. We'll delete the orgs. We are going to have a certain number available to us for our whole team. So let's get rid of these as soon as we're done with our CI run. So all of the commands from the CLI have been brought together here to do a test run. Again, I didn't need to know much about Travis. This stuff up here is boilerplate. It was set up kind of for me by running through the trail. And these are the same commands that you, a developer, are going to use down here when you're doing your development work. Let's go over and see what happened with our friend Travis. He's still running. We can look through and see the script that we were just talking about. Where are my $signs? So sudo at the beginning. A lot of text. Where are you? So here we've got our force org push. So here's our auth right there. Force org create. We got force source push. You see it says, yeah, it pushed all your Apex classes and your Aura bundles. You see here Apex test run. Here are test results. Got my beer quality inspection tests have all passed. And my nuclear fusion tests have passed. My redundancy tests, everything passed. And down here, we're now doing some lightning tests. And this right here is that's why I pre-baked the scratch org before. All of you are running Salesforce DX for the first time. There's been a run on domain names, so it's taken a while. But as soon as that's done, the lightning test will run, and my CI run will have finished. So there you have it. The basic 347. The basic principles of CI. So let's jump back in here with a quick conclusion. Salesforce DX is going to make this easy for you. Scratch orgs are going to make it consistent across all of your developers and all your tests. CLI is going to make it easy for you to make a CI setup with any of the tools that you've got already in your arsenal, or you can just do what I did and just cheat and use Travis based on the trail. Improve developer productivity, better code quality, happier teams, happier users, happier everybody. And with that, I'm going to open up for some Q&A. Before I open up for Q&A, I've referred to it a couple times. Please go take the trail. Take all the trails. There's one on Git, so you don't fall off the rock like we saw before. There's one on DX in general, one about migrating your stuff to DX, and there's one on continuous integration. If you haven't already, I'm assuming you have, but if you haven't already, you should go yourself set up to do DX. And we're getting towards the end, but there's still a few more DX sessions that you can go to. And let me just see if did my thing finish up here? Yep, it passed, so I can come back over here. We'll see that all my checks have passed. This branch has no conflicts with base branch. I merged my pull request, and I can delete my branch and clean up, and there we go. I have done changes safely, practicing safe SAS, and we've got everything merged back into the primary branch. So with that, thank you very much, and Q&A if anyone has questions. So questions. Is there a microphone for questions? I don't know. I'll just repeat them. Go. Do you have to have a production org linked? Yes, you do. You need to have a dev hub. Your production org can become a dev hub, or if you're ISV, your LMO can become a dev hub, or you can get a trial. But yes, scratch orgs are pulled from a. Yes, there's a cap, and it's going. Yeah, there's a number that you can do for your whole team. So, questions? There is a free user that you can use that will let you just get API access and access for the purpose of grabbing scratch orgs out of that pool. So there's a user for, not everyone has to have access to the full production org. You can sign up API users for that dev hub to that. Other questions? Yes. Did I push which to the scratch org? Can I push my new org to the scratch org? You push your code into your scratch org, yes. So I'm pushing my code into the scratch org, running tests. I can open it up. I can look at the Lightning component I created before I'm done, and then I push the VCS. So I'm pushing my source code, which is local, and I push that into the scratch org before I push it to the VCS. That's the question. Yep. I can't hear. Push when I did, your question is, when I did the source push, does it push all of the code to the scratch org? If the scratch org is empty, it pushes all the code. So the first push, the initial one, will be, in fact, everything. After that, it would just be the diff. That's correct. Every time you create the CI job, it will push all of the source code. Now, one thing you'll learn is that you probably don't want your whole org as one giant project. You're probably going to want to subdivide into several distinct applications that are independent of one another, and you'll just push the source code for those applications and run the tests on those, and you'll have one job that's that integration job where you got 5 different streams that are coming into it. That's where you push all the code to make it faster. But yes, it will push all the source code that you need into the org to do your CI testing. All right. Good. Here, come on up here. So your question is, I've now done some tests to merge into my master branch here, right? Are there any checks before I push into production? Right, so, okay. So the tests were run in a scratch org. I ran tests myself before I pushed my stuff back into the version control system. The CI system ran a whole bunch of tests of its own. And so everything's been tested at an automated level, right? Now I can say that's ready for production, or I could say it's ready to be deployed in a user acceptance sandbox. I can define what the next step in the process is going to be, but the automated tests have run in the scratch org. I'm not sure. The automated deployment, I didn't talk about the automated deployments here. You can use the CLI to set that same thing up, right? You can build an org, install a package. You could refresh sandbox, install a package. So you'll be able to use the CLI to set that part up too. Yeah. Yeah. Question. Sorry.
What about stuff that's not metadata? Like there's manual steps that have to happen.
Right. What about stuff that's not metadata? The goal is that there's going to be nothing else that's not metadata. That's our goal. There will always be something, because we're always going to be acquiring another company or adding more functionality, and so there's always going to be new things that aren't there. But we are trying to get everything such that the manual steps are down to 0, because you can't automate a manual step, right? I need that little bird there to hit the button if I have to, and I don't want that. So we're working on towards as close to 100 as we can get, 100%. Right, so when Travis creates the scratch org, if we're going to do 50 a day, if you delete the two, there's two things that we track. We track how many you have used in use and how many you're, what's the throughput effectively. If you delete the scratch org at the end, it won't count against your active count, right? So you spin it up, so now I've got one in use, but at the end I delete it so I don't have it in use anymore. We still have a throughput, like a number per hour, number per day that you can spin up, so that people don't accidentally set something up to the loop and create 150 scratch orgs when they really only wanted one. But if you spin them up and remove them, the idea is that that doesn't count against you long term. Other questions? Yes, no? I got zeros on the clock now, so I'm going to say thank you all. If you have more questions, come on up. Thanks everybody for joining.